Hello, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to, of course, build on more on the building tool, and we're going to talk a bit more about what data tables are and how we can use them. So if you already followed along, you will have basically this house generator in place. We can generate here from boxes. You can see we can just place boxes and then we'll pick up a house. So that's all working great now. So we, of course, if you know, we then also have patterns that we can fill in. We can say I want floor A, floor B, things like that. So we can define patterns by ourselves. Now, currently, everything is sort of hard-coded inside tool. If I want to have a different model, I will actually have to make sure it's actually built in Houdini, built in the background in the tool itself, so I can actually have the freedom to type these things here. So what I want to do is I want to have a flexible system where I just have data tables where I can then say, I want this floor, this thing, and this thing. This also makes it useful to, for example, other artists to add things. So here in my demo project, or my demo file, so this is another demo project, we can see this is an example of the building tool fully using the data tables. So currently what we have in our setup, or what we made yet, is that we just basically, again, have either one or two models. We don't have necessarily a big library. So what we have here is data tables to then define what to place on these things. Now, if you look at the data tables, so here I have them open, I have two of them. I have one that describes the meshes to use. So here we have a data table that just, as you can see, it will describe all the messages. It will get all the models to use. And you can see it will automatically get that path for instancing as well. And it will also get a name and a size. So this is a collection of all the models that we want in our building tool. And then, of course, we have a data table that defines how the models behave over the floors. So as you remember from setting up the building tool in Houdini, we of course need to define first of all the models, and then we need to define how the models will behave over different floors. So that's basically what we're doing here. So we have these two data tables working together to make sure we have the correct data. So that's how that is done over here. And then we can use it to, for example, create a building with some more interesting variation and things like that. Now, jumping back into our scene is, first of all, how do we make a data table? So here we can go to just like a base folder, building tools. And the first thing that we need to do is we're going to right click, we're going to go to blueprints, and we want to create here a structure. So we want to define what is going on. So this is not a data table yet. It's just basically defining the structure of the data table. So we're going to call this, for example, structure. And this is then for the meshes. So for the meshes. So we open this, and then as you can see, we're going to have to add what are the types of data that I would like to have. So of course, first of all, I would like to know the location or what the model is. Then I would like to know the name of the model. And then I would like to know how large the model is. So we're going to have to add 3 of them. So here we're going to just click add, and then we're going to here switch to static mesh, for example. So static mesh component somewhere. So here static mesh object. Then we're going to here switch to a normal string value. And then here we have a boolean, and we're going to here have a float. And of course, we need to name this. So this is the actual model name. This is then the actual name of the mesh. I'm just going to call his name. And this is then the size. So basically, actually just the length of this, because the height is controlled by the floor parameter. So if you want, you can open this and you can add some tooltips, things like that. But for now, we're just going to hit save. And now with this, we're going to create our data table. I'm going to go back here in our folder, right click, it's under miscellaneous. And we have here the data table. So we're going to click on it, and then it will again, it will say hey, what is the structure you want to use, which is basically the thing that we just created. So here we're going to find our structure. So structure for the meshes, press OK. And then here we have a data table for all our static meshes. So meshes or models, or maybe we can just call it building modules, like so. And we can open this, and it will probably be empty. And we need to click on the plus icon. And as you can see, we'll now add these things. So here we can, at the bottom here, edit this. So we can say, again, what is my model? So we can, for example, now go to my models, grab a model, and just fill it in over here. So it will automatically get, again, that location, which is very useful to have in Houdini. Then we want to give this a name. Let's say, for example, A. and we want to have this size. So for the size, how it is done right now is that you basically are going to just like hover over your model, and here we can see our size and height. So we can also open this and we'll see our the approximate size. So for now it will be 270. So 270. What is also interesting to mention is, again, the unit difference between Houdini and Unreal. So Houdini, it is 270 units, but in Houdini, it will actually be divided by 100, which will make it 2.7 units in Houdini. So it's important to make sure you're consistent with that. So either fill in the Houdini values, or if you want to fill in the Unreal values, be consistent with that along the way. So now we can just fill in more and more and more of these models. So maybe let me fill in a couple more, and then we're going to jump back. So here in my case, I fill in a variation of each of one of them. So I have A, B, C, and D. So I also added 1, 1, 1. In case, as you can see, I have actually multiple models of, for example, A and B. So I can later on even make this bigger if I want to. So that is done. So this is the part where I'm going to define my models. Then next step is we need to make another data table. So here we're going to go back. Maybe we, of course, should make a folder that's called data tables. And probably is a good idea to then drag and drop these over there. So we have that now over here. So we want to do the same thing now for the floors. So I'm going to right click, go to blueprints. We want to make the structure. So this is the structure for the floors. So floor structure. Then we're going to open that. So what we mainly need here is the order of how models can be placed and the height. So we actually need two things here. We can always like add more if you want to, of course. So here we're going to mainly use a string, and we can also use the float. So save. We're going to, of course, give this a better name. So this is then actual, I would say, pattern. And this is then the height. And with that, we can now, again, go back here and create our data table. And we have to pick our floor structure. Click OK. This is my data table for floor patterns. And we're going to open this. So you can, for example, now click the plus icon. So I might open both of these data tables here, because what is important now is the naming that we placed over here will be used here now in our patterns. So whenever I make a pattern, so this will have to be the same patterns that we actually built in Houdini. So remember these brackets that we used. So let's say I want to have a floor where we're only going to place model A. So I can, for example, copy the name, but in this case, it's of course a simple name. We're going to place these brackets. We're going to paste the naming and call it done. So we're just going to fill in that pattern over here. And the height of this is, of course, make sure this is the same as the model, which in this case is 400. So here 400. I might even think it's actually less because of these spikes that we have here. So that was built in on these models. So it's probably going to be 360 or something like that. So I'm already going to here fill in 360. And again, same here, unit difference. So we are sending the Unreal units to Houdini. So we will have to, in Houdini, divide this by 100. So here we can now again like fill in more of them. What we can also do, of course, is we need to give this a name. We use the row name. So we just can overwrite the row name. Or what we can do is, if you still feel like you would miss something in the data tables, we can go back to our structure. And we can, for example, say I want to add a variable. I want to move it, for example, here on top. So we can move it on top. And this is then also a string. And this is then the floor name. So floor name, and press save. And if you go back to our data table, we will now see that we can have the floor name over here. You might want to be careful with spaces, I think. So I'm just going to do it like so. So then we're going to call this floor, and we're just going to basically call this style A or A1, because this is just using building block A. And again, we can make our building table a bit larger, like I can make multiple of them. For now, this will already be more than enough to show how I'm going to use these data tables. So I can close all of that. Now we have our building tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm not necessarily going to open Houdini. I don't have it open yet. So what I will do is I will actually here go to Houdini and we will open a session sync. So we can here click on open session sync. This will actually launch a new instance of Houdini, as you can see, and this will be linked directly to your Unreal. And you will see in a moment how that will go. So if everything went right, you will basically have Houdini open with like this global node. So if you see the global node, that means that we basically have a connection between Unreal and Houdini now. So to test this fully out, what we can do is we can just, of course, click on our building tool. We can just click rebuild, and it will directly now open this in Houdini in the background now. So if I just switch to Houdini, we can now see that we have the global nodes, but we have these bunch of other nodes. So here I can see my main building tool actually, and we have some input data. So if I now go to my building tool, we can of course have these boxes. So these are the same from Unreal. So you can see that these are Unreal boxes. Very interesting to know is that of course they will hold attributes and group data. Important to know because sometimes this might be useful or sometimes this might even can cause issues. So be careful and think about these things. So then we have eventually our building tool with our point cloud as output. So what we want to do now is actually want to build a couple options to also use and load my data tables. So here I'm going to open my tool, right click, and I want to say allow editing. So now I can start here, do an editing process. So what we will do is I will just create an object merge node. So we just like place it like this. And we're going to go to our assets and open here our building tool asset. And we want to go to parameters. We want to now also here from our object merge node, grab the object. So maybe first I'm actually going to make a few folders. So here make a folder for the pattern. So patterns, and I'm going to make a folder for the data tables. So data tables. And I'm going to here grab this block and drag it here in patterns. So this will make it a bit more organized in Unreal. So under data tables, of course, I want to here just drag and drop this in there. So we make sure it's definitely in here. I'm going to press apply. And this is, for example, then the data table for my meshes. So meshes data table, for example. And we're going to have to press apply. So now if we go back to here, our building tool, and I'm going to here rebuild this for a moment, we should see now the option to have data tables now. So here I have data table, and I can now look for my data table. So if I now would search for the data table of the building modules, I can now input this over here. Now, since I actually rebuilt my tool, it actually also remade this node. So be careful if you click rebuild, you will also, as you can see, have actually a new version because it will actually fully reload and rebuild these things. So I'm going to again here click on editing, make sure it's open. And then here we have our data table. So right now, again, what is our data table? And this is then the actual data that we get directly from Unreal, are points. So we can see here that the link here is we have some sort of Houdini actor instance from Unreal. So this is like the data. So here we can jump to this if you want to like look at it. So this is what we get. So we get a bunch of points. And what is important is that on each point, we basically now have the same information as the data table. So the thing that we created in the data table is here as well. So we have our meshes, or the location of the mesh, the model name, then the model name, as I mentioned, and of course here the sizes. So these are the values that I want, and the other values I can practically delete if I want to. So, but this is actually the data that I have, and I actually, of course, want to use this now in my system. So I'm going to go back to my object. I'm going to go here to my tool again, and I'm going to go inside of here. So one of the first things that I want to do is I want to rename these names over here. You can see that these are named like Unreal Data Table 1 model, Unreal Data Table 2 name, and so on. So we're going to here go and place a renaming node. So here rename, and we're going to say that the Unreal underscore data table number 1 underscore models is, for example, now called Unreal instance. And you will see that now it's called Unreal instance. So when everything went right, you should have now usable names or more understandable names. The only thing is, of course, if you're going to change your structure of your data table, let's say I'm going to suddenly want to have more data and more things, you're going to have to be careful that these namings are still correct. Because as you can see, they are numbered from 1 to 3, and then it has the name. So be careful. If you're going to do a lot of different things, you might want to check on the renaming note here again. So next step is what we want to do is, so we still have these points, and I want to basically collapse them on point 0. So I'm just going to bring in a wrangle node, because this is a very easy way to do it. And I'm going to directly say, at the position of the points, they are now all equal to 0, 0, 0, and close that off. So I'm just forcing them to be here. With that now in place, I want to now do a for each loop for each point. So here for each point, which in this case is only 4, and we want to make this a bit bigger. So for each point, what we want to do is we want to use here actually the utility tool. So I want to do a similar process of what I have over here. So I want to first of all make a geometry, which can, for example, be a grid shape. And then on that grid, I want to then here create a utility node and make sure we have the Unreal instance. So we're going to do basically this system in the loop node. So here what we're going to do is we're going to copy a grid on the points. So copy to points. And we can just, for example, say a grid. This can be for now 1, 1, 1 and 2 by 2. Very basic grid shape. Maybe the orientation should be a bit different, but let's also bring the utility tool. So building utility. And we're going to plug that in over here. So I know how to rotate my model like so. And it should also be matched. So let's do match by size. So it should be sitting here on the bottom and like so. So we have something like that. So you can like perfectly try. So you can like try to scale this plane to the perfect size of the model, but in this case, it doesn't matter that much for now. So now comes the interesting part: is we need to automatically fill in here the naming, and of course the dimensions. So what I did here with previously is I just hit auto dimension, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just directly check the attribute data. So what we can do here is, or what we can actually see here is that on our plane, we still have these attributes available. So I can still see that I have name, size, and the instancing data. So with that, I can now say that this is my name. And now what we need to do here is we need to get our points data. So points, and we actually need to type in a S because we actually need to have the string value. So when you type in a S, it will actually return the string attributes. So we need 3 values over here. So we have a geometry to look at, we have our number, and we have the attribute. So geometry will be 0 itself. Then point number will also be 0 because it doesn't matter in this case, as you would see. And then, of course, we have then the attribute, which is name. So we're going to say 0, 0, slash name. And we're going to close that off. And if we fill in the right thing, you should now be able to actually view the result by middle mouse clicking here. So you can see this result now. So we're going to do the same now for here getting the point values. So as I mentioned, so either we can do the same thing here where we get the points. So we can also type in here like get points. That will work as well. Let me just like directly fill that in here. What we can also do is we can play around with the scale. So I would place a wrangle here and then I will use autofill. So let's now here just say again point. And just to make sure to double check the values is size is here a string. That's actually important to know. So Even though in Unreal is it like, hey, this is like a float, this is an integer, these values are getting imported here, as you can see, as string value. So that's something to definitely like double check and keep in mind, otherwise you might come across like weird issues. So we can here in our Vex code write something for that if you want to. We can say like our size. Size is now basically, we will use a function for that. So here we're going to use this one, and this will convert the string to an integer. And we want to get that as size value, and let's see if that will work. So in this case, I can probably not just simply overwrite the name. So I'm just going to call this now maybe length. And now I should be able to have like length over here. So now we have that in place. Then when we move over to our network, I'm going to go back here to our points. So we have the points and we want this to from 0, 0, dot length dot 0, and this should give us the value. So it now gets value 200. So sometimes you need to like refresh the loop, and then you will have it here. What is interesting to do here as well is maybe do the divide by 100 of units. So 100 units. So it's now set to 2. And I'm just going to here force the height to 1 since I don't directly have information about the height. But again, the height is controlled in the floor, as we also did here, because the height is here controlled by the floor. Then we'll just plug it like so, and we can just here keep checking on our data. So what will happen with the utility tool, we'll also create a bunch of data on the primitive. So we can see here our module dimensions, the height, the naming, and some other things that we will use. So this is sort of ready and done. So I can actually now start to slowly remove this part over here. So before I do that, I'm also going to here load in my other data table. So again, we need to do object merge node. And with that, what we want to do here is we need to again plug it in into our system. So we're going to grab it here. And this is then the floor data tables. I'm just going to call it like that. We're going to jump here into Unreal. And when we probably do a rebuild or a recook, probably better to do a recook. But in this case, a rebuild will be necessary to rebuild the menu. But of course, make sure that you are saving out the tool. So I'm going to make sure that my tool is saved because the rebuild will do a reloading of the tool. And what we will now see is that we have now options to have the data table. So here, data table for the floors. So of course, you can also automatically assign these data tables. So here I'm like plugging them in. So if you want to, of course, automatically do them, you can just hit right click, copy references. Same as we did with the instancing and so on. Then, like I mentioned, when we rebuild, it might actually lock up the node again. So here, I'm going to go in this tool, and we probably have then one single point because only made one single floor that describes the floor. So when we go here to our properties, I might going to here fill in the default value R of the data table. So every time I open a tool, the data tables are there. So the artist doesn't have to like look up these data tables. It will just be there for them. So here we're going to go to channels, and these are like the default values. So if I now paste this over here, I will now hold that data table. So here we hold the data table of the building blocks or building modules. So I think that's actually here, this one. So then of course we want to grab the other one. So this is for my floor. So copy reference, going back here, going to our floor, overwrite this and press enter, press apply. And then we have that by default. So this will be very easy to use then. Then we're going to press accept, and we're going to build in our structure. So what we actually built here, this can be exactly the same of that as well, because it will use the same logic. So here we built like these basic shapes, and we want to now copy this over here. So of course, our renaming will be totally different because we had different values. So we have here the floor name. So here we're going to say, or maybe make this menu a bit bigger, that data table number 1 called floor name can now be called maybe also floor name as well. So now we are again having a bit more readable data. Then I'm going to do the same step where I'm going to just say to all the points, they should now be fully on point 0. So in this case, I only had 1 point. Then here we're going to use this one probably as well, and that is for the height. So again, if we double check on the height, this is actually now currently a string value. So again, important to know about this because here we then need to basically grab this. So maybe I'm going to call this height string or something like that. Maybe I just put an S after it so I know it's maybe a string. I'm going to copy that over here and I'm going to place it like here. And this will now be actually my height. So now I have a proper height value. So double checking here. So height is a float. So then we have our system. We have the loop, but in this case, probably will need to here use some double checking and reworking here. So currently what we need to do is we don't going to use the building modules anymore. So I'm going to just fully remove whatever we had here, just to make sure there is no issues. Maybe do a delete channel here. We're going to go to floor descriptions. And if you remember from how we built the floor descriptions over here, we need to, of course, give this a name. We need to fill in the pattern and we need to set the dimensions. So we need to do all these things. So first of all, we need to get a name, which is, of course, very similar to what we had over here. So I'm just going to grab this, going to copy that, and I'm going to place it over here. So our name is not a valid attribute anymore, because we can actually call it floor name. So I'm just going to copy these values or attributes around. So we're just basically now saying like, look at the points for anything that is called floor name. And this will then be my value, which is called style A1. Then just use our pattern system and it will be the same. So here, let's grab this part again. Let's fill it in over here. And what we need to say is we want something which is called the patterns, of course. So we want to grab the pattern, which is just A1. Then we have our dimensions. And what I mainly mentioned is that our height is important. So I'm just going to fill in 1. And then our height will be then the points. So from 0, 0, 0, looking for height attribute and index is 0. So this will be returning the value 3600. Which should be divided by 100 units. So that will be set. So that should give us the right data if I now would continue with the loop to have a base shape of that, with also again here some values. So this is now ready to be merged. So I'm going to merge the results. And I want to then plug this into my building tool. Now, what currently will be dangerous is we have currently, if I go to the patterns, we are using different types of patterns now that do not exist currently in my new system. So either what we can do is we can merge these two together, but that also basically means that I still have these hard-coded things there, which might be able to conflict because I've used quite similar namings like A1 and B. So I'm deciding to fully override this. I'm going to go into Unreal. And I'm going to go switch to our pattern system. And I'm going to fully say that we only want one of them. I'm going to remove the tags for a moment. And I'm going to then also switch to generic because this is the basic built-in from the building tool itself. Now switching back to our Houdini setup, we will now have just generic. And it will be now safe to just plug it in like so. So we're now going to fully utilize our custom data table system. So make sure we can save our tool and let's test our tool. So the only thing then the artist would have to do is, for example, grab the data tables. They can just have it on the side somewhere and then they can just grab whatever they have here. So for example, if I want to have this part, we should be able to just say that we want to have style A1. And as you can see, we'll place these models correctly. Now, to make things, of course, a bit more fun, you have to build more and more of these. What might also be interesting is that, say, I would include more models. Let's say I want to have a B1 here as well, and I put res save. It's not going to magically update this. The tool actually, of course, needs to be either recooked or rebuilt. So what needs to happen is, of course, the data needs to be a little bit refreshed. So by default, Houdini Engine will not check the data table every single time. It will just check it when you click the buttons. So as you can see, we can now use and build custom patterns for our building tool here directly in Unreal. So again, when you work with a team, what you only have to do is you're going to have these data tables, you give them to your artist, and you're going to say, like, use them to fill in interesting patterns, to make a library of your models and floors, and then you can use it fully in here in the Houdini tool to make customized things. And that's basically where I'm going to wrap up this video. So this already is a bit more longer video, but you will basically now find everything you will need to use data tables correctly with the building tool, and I hope you will be able to use this and to your advantage. So data tables are very useful when you have a large set of models, like hundreds of models. You can just make a data table out of them, and then you can do a loop system in Houdini to have what you need. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.